Hello everybody and welcome back to Time of the Whovians United. Today we're going to review another season of classic Doctor Who. This time it is number 7. Today we've got another special guest. So, would you like to reveal yourself?
Hello, yes, I'm Elliot, aka EMS Productions, who you may know from, I guess, doing reaction videos, doing review videos of Classic Who and New Who, talking about sort of all things news related to Doctor Who, rankings videos, just a whole lot of Doctor Who stuff I've been doing for the last kind of 4 or 5 years now. I think it's been, I kind of lose track of how long it's been really, but yeah, and I mean, season 7 is one of my favourite seasons of Classic Who, so of course I had to come on and talk about it.
If you've not seen his channel before, go on and check it out right now. Really good Doctor Who channel, really good, a lot of videos worth watching on there. If he's new, go and subscribe to him and help him out. He's also actually appeared in our, now which episode of Series 12 did you cover with us on our Did It Fails?
So I did the Timeless Children. I remember doing that, and obviously that was a pretty controversial episode anyway. And so talking about that about 35 minutes after the episode had aired was quite an experience.
It was.
Yeah, it was interesting. I enjoyed it though. It was good fun. I think I had a more positive viewpoint than most people, but yeah, it was good fun.
So yeah, and it's no stranger to the channels that already appeared before. So if you've not seen that episode of I Did It Fail, feel free to go and check it out. He appeared in that one, and like he said, he had quite a positive view of the episode, and that's quite a contrast compared to the others in the group. I do remember that. So we'll get straight into it then. So Elliot, so you said that season 7 is your favourite season of classic Doctor Who. So overall, then, what do you think of it as a season then?
Sure. So yeah, I generally would put season 7 as a whole season as my favourite of the classic series of all 26 seasons, simply because it's got 4 phenomenal stories in it to start off with Spirit from Space, Doctor and the Silurians, The Ambassadors of Death, and Inferno. And for me, all of those stories are consistently good from start to finish. It's the start of a new, very different era of Doctor Who, of course. We come off the back of the Patrick Troughton era of black and white days, and suddenly the Doctor at the end of that is, of course, exile to Earth. We move into colour. Doctor Who, it's probably the biggest change and reboot to Doctor Who that we've really ever seen, in terms of there is not, basically the only thing that carries over between Patrick Troughton's last story and John Pertwee's first is the TARDIS. Obviously, the unit is kind of used a little bit as that transition, but pretty much all the characters are new. Obviously, it's in colour. You've got a new Doctor, a new companion. It feels such a completely kind of different but refreshed and revitalized show, I think, with a new sort of utilizing the opportunity really of having Earth-based stories to kind of find more innovative ways of telling those stories. And so I think it sort of having watched lots of the documentaries about sort of the creation of some of these stories, and people like Terence Dix talking about the challenges of once you're on Earth, you've got the 2 stories. You've either got a mad scientist or an alien invasion storyline, and it's actually, there's not that many other things, or they thought initially there wasn't that many other things they could do with it, but then it just sort of encourage the creativity, and then things like the parallel universe used inside in Inferno, the sort of Doctor and Silurians, where it's the aliens were here all along. Just these interesting different twists on sort of story ideas that I think are really, really interesting. I think overall, probably season 7 is one of the most sort of dark and bleak seasons of Doctor Who in many ways, particularly in the classic series, maybe apart from the sort of some periods of the Hinchcliffe era, where obviously it goes much more into the sort of horror vibe, sort of darker storytelling in that sense. But there's a very much sort of a sense of almost dread and doom, particularly like in a story like Inferno, where we basically see the end of the world. We see this alternate universe being destroyed, and that's a very, very dark concept. I think that kind of defines a lot of these stories, really. There's some sort of quite dark moments in there, but I think that in many ways gives it that sort of more gritty edge, and just creates such a good set of stories that just feel so consistently good throughout, even when you've got, in many ways, the challenge of having 7-part Doctor Who stories. That I mean, people complain about 6-parters being padded, but when you've got a 7-parter, it can get a bit much. And I think in some of the stories, maybe Doctor and Silurians, there's a couple of episodes where they introduce that virus that is very much sort of, we need to pad it out for 2 extra episodes, or you're not going to get to episode 7 here, so let's chuck a little virus in there. But I don't feel like it completely ruins the story in any way for me. So yeah, overall, I'm waffling a little bit, but overall, I'd say it's such a strong season because the 4 stories themselves are so consistently good. There really are 4 great, interesting, and innovative plots.
Yeah, you know what? I absolutely agree. I can understand why you would waffle on, because there is so much to say about it. There's so
exactly.
much. But yeah, for me, it's it's definitely the perfect start to a new era, because we're now in colour, we're now, like I said, on Earth, and having to try to think of new ways to try and keep the show going and make it as creative as ever. I feel like season 1 was a great start to Doctor Who, but it didn't get. I feel like it definitely got more popular within like season 2. But then again, Patrick Troughton's first season was really good, but I do feel his best is season 5. But here, for Pertwee, I feel like 7 is like the perfect start. It's an excellent introduction into the Doctor. You really get him from the start, and he's pretty much consistent all the way through. You know, you got the introduction of Liz, and I feel like Liz is so underrated, and I feel like her introduction was brilliant. And then you've obviously got the reintroduction of Unix as a full force. Now we had them previously in the Invasion and the Web of Fear, but well, mostly the Invasion, because that's when they really became units. But here they got reintroduced, and you really saw the size and the force that came with them. And you know what? Music. I think the music has been brilliant all across the whole season for me. So many pieces of music that really stand out and really carry episodes, and it's really adds to the tone. It really creates a great tone for each individual story itself. I think the music, you know, they actually really capture the essence of what 70s music is supposed to be, and it really fit well with this season in particular. So we'll start off then with the Doctor, the third Doctor then, Elliot. What do you think?
Yes, so firstly, I agree with everything you said there, and I'll talk a bit more about the music as well a bit later on. But in terms of the Doctor, he's always been one of my favourite classic series Doctors, Jon Pertwee. I love the sort of more action-orientated role that he takes on as the Doctor. He very much, you know, is getting in all these different vehicles throughout his tenure, but even in season 7, you sort of in the very early in the season, you get the introduction of Bessie, the new car that gets to drive around. He's never had a car or anything like that before in the show, and it's just really cool that he sort of gets these extra sort of opportunities to do a bit more action orientated Doctor Who, which I think just makes it more exciting in many ways. And so although he can maybe be a little bit more abrasive as a Doctor and slightly more difficult to get on with, he's a little bit sort of harder to be convinced of things sometimes, compared to maybe the Patrick Troughton Doctor was. I think that actually works quite well, kind of playing off the unit sort of organization and some of the kind of decisions that he very much disagrees with in what they're doing. And so we sort of see that kind of constant conflict almost between the Doctor, who doesn't want to kill anybody, wants to always find a peaceful solution, and Unit and the militaristic solution of let's just blow everything up. And I think that's obviously best shown at the end of Doctor and the Silurians, when the Doctors sort of save the day essentially, but then they still go and blow up the Silurian caves unit just to make sure, and you can just see the Doctor's sort of anger and frustration at that. And so I think that's it's just a really nice dynamic that's played out throughout the season. And I think he does go from strength to strength, particularly in sort of a story like Inferno, where he sort of ends up in the parallel universe and is having to meet all these characters that he sort of thinks he knows but doesn't actually, because they're the alternate versions of them. I think that's a really sort of interesting dynamic that he plays really, really well. And even in his sort of introductory story, I think sort of the whole thing about like when he's lying in the bed and the thing with the shoes and then just racing around in a wheelchair and stuff when he's trying to escape the hospital, there's just so many great and exciting moments. And I think that's what the sort of Jon Pertwee Doctor really introduced into the show, was that the Doctor can be sort of the leader of doing all the action scenes, whereas the Doctor was meant to be an older grandfatherly figure that very much would not get involved in any stunts, and it would be the younger male companion who would do all of that. I feel like we finally reached the point where it's the Doctor who's just throwing himself into all that, and I think that's really, really exciting to watch and to see, I think.
Yeah, absolutely agree. As everybody will know, that the third Doctor is my favourite Doctor of all time. He really, really is. He is so charming, but so rude at the same time. He's got great contrast. He can be so charming, you know, how do you do, but then comes in with some absolute insults. You know, whenever the world needs saving, he doesn't care for anybody else apart from the world that needs saving. And it's some of the things I love, because he's got so many like brilliant one-liners coming up throughout his era. Specifically one in obviously Terror of the Autons we'll get to in the next one. I just love that one, you know. But I just love when I think it's the Ambassadors of Death, where the guy's like, you know, is talking, and the doctor's like, no, we can't do that, or don't do this, and the guy disagrees, and he just goes, the man's a fool. The man's a fool. And it's just so funny how he can be so charming and then he can just turn into this rude man who can just, because he's so authoritative, compared to the others. He's that really tall build, and he can just walk into buildings and go, I don't care, I'm coming in, sort of thing, where he walks into the space station, he goes, I haven't got a pass, I don't care, get out of the way, I'm going to save the world, get out, sort of thing. I ain't got a pass, shut up. He's got so much authority, and he really can stand up to the Brigadier. He can sit him down, literally. Their conflicts are so funny, but he can really sit him down when he wants to, because he has a genuine want to save the world, and he's not going to let anybody stop him. And he has that authority ofness, and it's so great. His costume. I love his costume. He's got many great costumes, of course, but his first one is my favourite one. The with the red line, the cape with the red lining. That was the first ever costume I ever bought for a doctor, and I absolutely love it. But I also think what's great about him, he's a real scientist. Like, we actually see him, because he's on Earth now, and he's obviously got all the equipment and the lab. We can really see him actually being a real scientist and actually doing experiments and doing a bit of engineering and stuff like that. And it really shows that actual sciencey side to him, and it's put to great use. He's now being employed as the scientific advisor for UNIT, and he really has a role. So that's really, really good. I actually, as well, I want to point out as well, I love how throughout this season, he always wanted to leave. Like, whenever there was whenever he had it was always, whenever he had a chance. So as soon as he got that TARDIS key, straight into TARDIS, right? I'm gonna have a go here, and then he realizes it's that smoking and blowing up, and it's like, just test driving it, just doing a test, I wasn't going anywhere, it's all right, it's just testing it out. And he just keeps trying to leave, and it doesn't work. Even in Inferno, where he actually just tries to fly off in the TARDIS console and ends up 200 meters down the road in a rubbish tip. It's just every chance he takes to leave, he'll take it, but every time he fails, he just passes it off and like, just testing it out again. No, I wasn't trying to get away or anything. So for me, he's as I just said, he's my favourite Doctor. Absolutely is, for all those reasons. So we'll move on to the companions. So we'll talk about obviously Liz Shaw, the Brigadier, and you can talk about the unit as a whole if you'd like as well. So what did you think of these guys?
Yeah, so Liz Shaw is definitely, I think, is probably one of the most forgotten companions of the classic series in many ways, because she is only in this season sort of as a companion. She has a very, very brief, I believe, scene in The Five Doctors, but apart from that, this is her only real appearance in the show. And she's in many ways quite different to what you'd expect from a companion, certainly in the classic series, where the companion's role, at least, was seen to be just to run around and scream at the monsters and ask the Doctor questions and things. But then in this season, you're thrown this rather different dynamic of a companion who's much closer to an equal with the Doctor. I'm not going to say an absolute equal, because she's not a Time Lord. She's not sort of like maybe Romano or something like that. But she's still a very well-educated scientist, basically, and is very much on a similar intellectual level in terms of sort of science and that sort of understanding, but is very sort of unsure about aliens and doesn't really believe in anything like that. And it's sort of fun to watch through Spear from Space in particular, her mind gradually being opened to the idea that there are actually aliens, sort of from her well-educated mind, shall we say. And yeah, she's a companion who I think that at times is kind of forgotten that she's quite as smart as she is, maybe. And sort of in some of these stories, things she does and sort of getting sort of into scrapes, getting chased by monsters and stuff. She does just a few things that are maybe a little bit silly for somebody who supposedly is so intelligent. But I do think she's very much a sort of a warm companion who's very easy to get very easy to get along with. I think she has a really good dynamic with the Doctor throughout this season. From early on, there's a little bit of just a hint of tension, but I feel like from there on, there's a lot of respect between the two of them, just because they're on that similar level, I think that makes such a difference. But I can also in many ways understand why they sort of felt that didn't really work, because it didn't give you quite sort of that, and hence why they went with Grosjean or Joe Grant, even if I get my words out, because there sort of wasn't that most easily relatable character. As much as you liked Liz as a character, she maybe was a little bit too intelligent for a younger viewer to be watching to be sort of relatable to, which I think is why they then sort of went towards the Joe Grant character for and that sort of more archetypal companion, shall we say, for the following 3 series, and to an extent with Sarah Jane, but then that was a little bit different as well. So yeah, overall I do very much enjoy her as a companion. I definitely would not have minded to see her do some more stories, because I think she did, having only had the 4 ultimately stories, it wasn't really that much content for her. So yeah, it's a little bit of a shame, and I think I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that, really. Then in terms of other people, obviously the main one is the Brigadier, who he's one of my favorite characters in Doctor Who history. Like, he's just wonderful. He's such an iconic character with the show. He has such a fun relationship with the Doctor in many ways, really, where there's always a slight bit of tension between the Brigadier and the Doctor, pretty much throughout sort of all the different incarnations of the Doctor meeting the Brigadier at all different times. There's always just a little hint of tension, because the Brigadier is this militaristic figure, and the Doctor is very much all about peace and solving things in a non-violent way. And so there's always going to be a slight clash there. But I think it just creates such wonderful sort of dialogue and dynamics. And then obviously the Doctor having to come on the payroll and working for UNIT under sort of almost the Brigadier almost in theory becomes the manager of the Doctor, which is just quite a funny idea, I think, really. And so yeah, he's just such a wonderful character throughout this. He always has such great sort of witty lines, just that sort of a hint of humour when he's got to be such a sort of serious military general type figure, but just throws in those sort of slight joking comments sometimes in just sort of such a deadpan way that I think works really, really effectively. And he just obviously has become, for all fans, such a sort of warmly loved character. And I think this is, of course, his first proper season, having appeared briefly in the sort of the second half of Web of Fear and the whole of the Invasion. Then he's got his proper Brigadier title, and he's sort of well established within UNIT for this story. And I just think it's a really, really good start to this era from that point of view. And so, coming to sort of UNIT as a whole here, this sort of story, this season, starting with Spear from Space, it establishes UNIT as an organisation that's going to be such a huge part of the show for really the next sort of 5 years almost. I guess obviously robots is sort of the last time that sort of it kind of continuously UNIT is used, but then they're also reused in Terror of the Zygons in 1975, which is kind of the final, what feels like the final proper UNIT story. And so it was so important to really set up this world around the Doctor that he's going to be stuck in for quite a while, because he spends the next, I think, sort of 3 seasons or so stuck on Earth, apart from the occasional getting around it to get out of Earth, but he's stuck on Earth with UNIT. And so it was so important to establish them as a proper sort of world, a proper organisation that the Doctor can kind of be a part of, but also have a bit of a clash with, and just create a really, really good dynamic. And I think it does such an effective job of that. There's just a few different really good characters in there. Of course, Sergeant Benton's introduced later in this season as well as another classic character, the sort of just the sergeant who sort of does a few silly things sometimes, but is also just another really fun, warm, lovable character that's just one of those favourites. He's the only real one that's introduced in this season, I think. We don't really sort of see more of them like Mike Yates introduced until season 8, but it's still great to have that initial sort of grounding of UNIT as an organisation, I think, and really helps sort of with the transitioning, just giving you some sense of familiarity into this new sort of world for the show in many ways, that I think really, really works and sets up the seasons to come.
Yeah, I've got to say, I do agree. I do feel like Liz Shaw does get forgotten about. She's one of those underrated characters that people do genuinely forget about, and I don't actually know why. I suppose you have got Joe Grant and Sarah Jane following that, quite popular, of course, but that's probably why. But yeah, she's definitely, because again, she's one of those that is very intelligent. She's got that science background. She's very, very knowledgeable and resourceful within the science world. So she can actually help the Doctor out. She can do tests. She can run experiments. She can build things. She's got a great working knowledge. And together, with that respect that they have, they work really, really well, because actually they both know exactly what they're on about. She'll ask the questions when she needs to ask the questions, but her understanding of a lot of things he says is actually pretty good. So working together, they do work very, very well at it. Yeah, so that's really good. But yeah, it's just a bit sad that she just gets forgotten. She's very, very underrated, I have to say. Yeah. The Brigadier. Yeah, as you said, he's very brutish commander, obviously in charge, but witty at the same time. He'll just say, allow a few things to slide. Sometimes he'll say things like he just can't be bothered, like, because he just doesn't always believe everything the doctor says. Sometimes he thinks the doctor's just having a joke or something. He just can't be bothered with some of the outlandish things he comes out with sometimes. But majority of the time, he has to be on it, in control, in charge, and that's his role within you, and he has to be. And for the majority of the time, he just tends to be in control. Him with Unit, they tend to be pretty on top of things. Apart from obviously the little bits here where when the aliens do, of course, invade or stuff happens. But yeah, and it's a great contrast. As you said, you've got Unit, who's very military, who's shoot first, ask questions later, get rid of the threat. Whereas the Doctor is very peaceful, trying to find a peaceful solution. And their conflicts are great, because you've got the Doctor trying to be more moral and ethical about it, whereas the Brig's just trying to be more get the job done. We'll deal with these aliens sort of thing. And yeah, their constant battles and conflicts every now and again is really good bits to see on TV. You get to see both sides of the story, and that scene, as you said, at the end of the Silurians, where he's like, yeah, we did good, we solved it, and then he blows them up, and it's like, well, we didn't quite win, did we really? Because they've blown them up. Sort of thing. We didn't quite win. So yeah, it really demonstrates both sides really well. Unit, like I said at the start, is very well established. We knew about them since the invasion, but here they're here in full force. You really see the size and scale of them. They're quite a big organisation. So yeah, it's great accompaniment, because when you have these big invasions with loads of aliens invading, you need some kind of force to try and take them down, and they do work well with that. They do actually work well in taking down whatever comes in their way.